Next, from Chicago, we speak one-on-one with representatives of three groups opposed to the effort to allow utility companies to raise electric rates and change the regulatory process. We hear from Bob Gallo of AARP, Paul Gaynor of the Illinois Attorney General's Office, and Barry Matchette of the Illinois Environmental Council. This runs about 45 minutes. Bob Gallo and Paul Gaynor, thank you for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We wanted to discuss with both of you the Senate Bill 1652, the electric utility rate increase bill is the way I would say it. Here in the Chicago area where we're taping this, people often refer to it as the ComEd bill. Of course, it impacts utilities across the state, so it's whether it's Ameren or ComEd for our viewers across the state. The proponents of this say that it will create the electric grid, improve that and allow for an upgrade which we desperately need, and that the cost to consumers really isn't that great. Bob, let's start with what is, as the head of AARP in Illinois, what is your cause for opposing the bill?
Well, first of all, it's easy for them to say that the cost to consumers isn't that great in one of the deepest recessions that the country's been going through in decades. We have so many individuals who are struggling with higher gas prices, higher food prices, and many of those individuals obviously we hear are losing their homes. So any increase in utility rates on top of even a state income tax increase for those who are working right now causes an even greater strain.
When we interviewed a representative from Ameren, he said the governor's office had put out faulty information as far as the actual cost, that they were saying the cost would be cumulative over 10 years, but only in the area of about $3 and some change per year for the average consumer.
Yeah, and average is the key word there, so it really depends. We've seen this rate, this rate increase bill, which is essentially what it is. This is not about modernization or smart grid. This is about guaranteed profits for utility companies at a certain rate. And if you're a business, it's good work if you can get it. Guaranteed profits are nice, but that's when it comes to a regulated industry where you need the consumer's voice in the process. We have a big concern with that as well, where we're trying to essentially circumvent a regulatory process that's been in existence for quite some time. And this bill helps to get around that.
Before I go to Paul, let me just ask you, any other business we would say, no, we don't want to guarantee profits. But the electric utilities are not a normal business. I guess we're starting to develop competition. I started to say there's no competition, but we all need electricity. It's not an optional thing if we want to buy something that may be an optional service that many of us enjoy. We all need electricity. The economy obviously wouldn't run on it. Their argument, the utilities, and as a reminder to the public, they're now in the transmission business, not in the energy creation business. Their argument is this costs millions and millions of dollars in expenses. We can't raise our prices like some other business might. We have to have our rate increases approved by the state. And so therefore, without knowing what kind of a rate of return we're going to get, we're not going to have the investment put in to make these multi-million-dollar upgrades. What's wrong with that argument?
Well, I think you have to also go back and say, what have they done with past rate increases? Since 2007, I think both Ameren and ComEd have received upwards of $670 to $700 million in rate increases. What have they done with that? What have they done with that new revenue? Upgrading your grid and your infrastructure is something that you do all along. You reinvest your profits or your revenues back into your system like any other business has to do. Other businesses don't get a guaranteed profit. In the 2010 legislative session, I have to remind the viewers that ComEd in particular had offered a $500 million donation to the state of Florida in order to help pay the state's debts. Why would they not put $500 million, if they had $500 million available to them, into their infrastructure?
On the actual cost, again, where Ameren was saying the governor's office was putting out a faulty number. Do you agree with the number, more or less, that they're saying that the average, they were saying that I think the average consumer and they admit there's no average, but using that phrase that the average residential consumer might use 10,000 kilowatts in a year, kilowatt hours.
I think something they have to take into consideration is that this isn't just a one-time rate increase, that the bill gives these utility companies the ability to raise their rates over a number of years. So if the average cost, and anyone can argue with averages, is X, then the following year it can go up again, and the following year it can go up again, and the year after that it can go up again. So this isn't just a one-time deal.
There's two aspects of this bill, and we'll come back to the one is the building the grid, the other is the regulatory environment. And Paul Gaynor, if we might, the regulatory environment I think is more your expertise, and representing the Attorney General's office is where you're prepared to discuss that. What's wrong from the Attorney General's office standpoint with the bill as it is currently written?
Well, what I'd like to do is take a couple steps back first before I answer your question to lay the groundwork and give it context. We're talking about, and you alluded to it, we're talking about a company that is a monopoly, okay? This is not a power generation company. This is the company that delivers the electricity to your house. You don't have any alternative. And as a result, since it is a monopoly and you don't have any alternative, and you alluded to the fact that this is a necessity, electricity, they are the only game in town. And so this regulatory process that Bob alluded to has existed for a long time, in fact, over a century. That regulatory process takes into account that Commonwealth Edison is, in fact, a monopoly, and that there has to be a regulatory structure in place that protects consumers while at the same time allowing the company to make a reasonable return on its investment, as well as provide reliable and efficient electric service, okay? This bill is really a solution in search of a problem. They may not like the fact that when they go to the Illinois Commerce Commission, that is the regulatory body that's in charge of approving or disapproving requested rate increases, they may not like the fact that they have to go through a process like that. But that process is in fact balanced. That process over the years has provided Commonwealth Edison with the resources they need, and they say they have a reliable system, although this summer doesn't really allude to that fact. We can talk about that a little later. But the fact of the matter is that this system is designed to compensate them and make it so that they can preserve their assets, they can make sure that we have a reliable system in place, and at the same time that customers and ratepayers are not fleeced in the process. That customers or ratepayers are actually paying a fair amount, and that amount, you know, relative to what Commonwealth Edison or the utility needs to make sure that the infrastructure is well maintained. Right now, they can go to the Illinois Commerce Commission and seek approval, which they do on average every 2 to 3 years, to ask for a rate increase. In fact, June 1st, they just got a rate increase. Over $155 million just went into effect. So when Commonwealth Edison has been shopping this around with their, you know, basically legions of lobbyists down in Springfield, have never seen anything like it, contract lobbyists, what they've been saying is, we want more predictability and certainty. The monopoly has the audacity to be talking about more predictability and certainty. And to Bob's point, that predictability and certainty relates to two things. Number one, guaranteed double-digit profits. And number two, annual rate increases, automatic rate increases of 9%.
When we say double digit, let's just go through some of the details specifically. When we say double digit, are we talking 10% or 99%?
We're talking 10%.
Okay.
We're talking about that right now. Let me also, alluding to the difference between the regulatory process vis-a-vis their profit now and what would happen under this bill, and it might be help understand this. Right now, when they go to the Illinois Commerce Commission and they ask for a rate increase, the Commerce Commission gives them what's called an authorized profit. Okay, that means that they're able, if they live within their means, they operate their company efficiently, and they do what they're supposed to do, okay, they could earn under the current rate case up to 10.5% profit, which is a pretty nice profit. I wouldn't mind getting that myself. None of us have really been getting that return lately on our investments. So what they want to do is,
And let me interject.
yes,
There's two different kinds of profit. There's gross margin, there's net.
return on equity, on their
10
investment.
10 is the bottom line.
Yes.
Okay.
So what they're trying to do here is, okay, and they call this pejoratively or negatively refer to it as the so-called regulatory lag. That is that when they make an investment, it takes time in between them going to the Commerce Commission, getting the approval they need to get, and that they're kind of left holding the bag because they make these investments they're not being reimbursed for, which frankly is just crocodile tears. What they want to do now is they want to make it so that once a year, annually, the company will file this form. It's called FERC Form 1. It doesn't really matter what it's called. It's something that's filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And they will file this thing, and there'll be a formula, and that automatically the rates will be set with a formula. Now, that formula then, there will be much less scrutiny. It'll be an 8.5-month process instead of an 11-month process. And we, as the Attorney General's office and other entities that try to protect consumers, we're called the interveners, okay? It's going to limit our ability to do the analysis we need to do of these.
In what way would it limit you?
Well, number one, just from a time period, it's less. It's almost 3 months less. And also, what they're going to file is going to be, it's going to be very, very hard to drill down and have the expertise to see everything they're doing that's included in their proposed rate increase.
Well, I might jump in, and time always goes fast, even with the length of time we have on the Illinois channel. So let me throw out a couple of points that I think the utility companies would make. And by the way, there's two different companies. I interviewed Ameren.
Yeah.
I did not interview a representative from ComEd. I think there's going to be some differences between those two companies, even though they would largely agree on, have the same position. But just for that purpose, there's going to be some distinctions. Ameren would say, I think, on some of the points you just made, one, we're talking about a regulatory environment where instead of it taking 12 months, it would take, I forget the number, was maybe 9 months. There's still plenty of time. It's not like we're asking for a 30-day approval where you're going to show sharp change that opponents of the bill wouldn't be able to get in. The other point, I think, and I'm going to condense some of what they said into a statement that wasn't a literal statement. They were saying that if you look at what we have today, we have a utility that a grid that has been put together over the years, kind of slapdash. That we initially started with Edison and people building out the electric grid in one city, and like whether it's Chicago or St. Louis or New York, and then it was almost secondarily that we interconnected these electric circles. That what we want to do, they would say, is fund the 21st century generation of the power grid, and therefore that means to get from here to there, we need more predictability. What's wrong with that argument?
That's just, again, that's my point, that it's a solution in search of a problem. That problem doesn't exist. Under the current regulatory structure, number one, they have an obligation to provide reliable, service, and number two, there's a structure where they can go to the Illinois Commerce Commission, and if this stuff makes sense and they should do it, then they get approval for it. They talk about smart grid like it's going to solve world peace and hunger. Okay, there's nothing that smart grid won't solve. Okay, to me, that may be true, or it may not be. To me, the best evidence of risk is that Commonwealth Edison and Ameren are not willing to guarantee those benefits. So if they're wrong, and I hope they're right about how beneficial this is all going to be, if they're wrong, the risk has all been on the consumers, and there's nothing that the ratepayers can do. To me, the best evidence that they're not so confident about that is that it does shift all the burden to ratepayers. And in fact, I'd like to read to you, okay, a quote. At Commonwealth Edison, its parent company is Exelon. Exelon is the generator. They generate the commodity. Mm-hmm. And John Rowe is the CEO of the parent company. Okay? And at the very moment that Ampere Majori was down in Springfield talking about the benefits of smart grid and how badly we need it, John Rowe was on the phone with his investors. And here's what he said about smart grid. It costs too much. We're not sure what good it will do. We have looked at most of the elements of smart grid for 20 years, and we've never been able to come up with estimates that make it pay. He went on to say, the real issue is, are we doing the customers more good by putting money into more advanced electronics? Or would we do them more good by putting the same money into replacing more old cable? If I had to choose, I'd bet on cable, end quote. That's the CEO of the parent company.
What was the context of him making that statement?
He was talking about to his investors on the phone about what they're, what to invest in and what the future holds.
Was that on a, because it's a publicly traded company on there?
It's public record. I can, yes, yeah, publicly available, and he doesn't deny he said it. So to me, again, we can all talk about how they're here to do us a favor, but what if that favor doesn't happen? They talk about how this technology is going to allow you to have smart appliances and smart this and smart that. In other words, you as the ratepayer, in order for these benefits to inure to you, this smart grid and all the technology, you're going to have to be a very, very proactive consumer.
I can hear the voice of the utility people wanting to counter, so let me give voice to them just so we can nail down some of the issues. Because one of the things they were saying is, first of all, we've not, I haven't had you all get on the record as far as what's the dollar amount. They're talking about it's going to cost only $3 a year, and even the poorest person, isn't going to be too stressed out by $3
a month is what they've been saying.
No, I think they were saying a year that the others, $3, $3, and $3, so that at the end of 10 years, it would be like $30 more a year.
Okay.
The other thing is they were saying that with the smart grid, people can alter their use so that they'll actually have more savings to countervail that slight increase. And I believe, and again, I am not an expert on the intricacies of all the aspects of this bill, I believe there's a cap that they were saying if the cap is exceeded, and I think it's 2.5%.
For 2 years.
That would then undo the approval, in other words, what the bill would grant them. Can you, let's address the cap issue if you want.
Well, let me start with the first point you made, which is they're saying all the benefits, and to my point, you're going to have to be a proactive consumer, okay? I remember...
And by that, if I can interject, they're saying if you did your wash at 11 o'clock at night when the power's less...
you can do, okay?
Right.
And I remember vividly watching Jimmy Carter on television wearing a sweater, asking people to turn down their thermostats,
right.
Okay? Well, that didn't get us out of the problem. And that's the first point. The proactive consumers, I think it's wishful thinking. I really do. I think they exaggerate those benefits. And my second point is why I think those benefits are exaggerated. And that is, again, and I repeat myself, if they think those benefits are going to happen, then why not guarantee them? Why not say if they don't happen, there are consequences to the company? And then number three, you talked about, the third point was...
The cap.
The cap. Mm-hmm. The cap is, the so-called, is an illusory cap for the following reason. I made the point that ComEd is a delivery company. They don't produce the commodity, they don't generate the power, they deliver it to your house. When you get your bill, that's only a third of the cost of your bill. Okay, so ComEd, the delivery company, is a third of your bill. And I oversimplify a little bit, but the rest of your bill is essentially the generation and other charges. Okay? So the 2.5% that ComEd is calling a cap, which by the way only lasts for 2 years, this is a 10-year period, that cap is on the entire bill, not on the delivery charge, which is the 1/3. So the problem with that is we know over the next 2 years, which is why this cap only relates to 2 years, that generation charges, that is the 2/3 of your bill that doesn't relate to ComEd, that's going down. Okay, we know that costs are going to go down
on the production.
On the production.
And
so you could take that money, it was something I think your viewers would probably care about, and you could decide what you want to do with it. You could put it in your pocket and save it. You could spend it on something you need. You can make that decision. What ComEd wants to do is decide to spend that money for you. So what they do is, in fact, this 2.5% cap, because it's on the whole bill, really masks the reality of 9% annual automatic increases on the delivery charge, the 1/3. So all that 2.5% so-called cap does is mask the reality that you're really getting 9% annual automatic rate increases.
Bob Gallo, on the topic of the power grid and the need to upgrade it from Edison's time, what are your thoughts on that aspect?
Well, I guess I'm amazed that 100 years later, ComEd and Ameren has woken up and said that we need to do something. Why would anything take 100 years to realize that you need to reinvest into infrastructure? If this was the Ford Motor Company, we'd still be driving Model Ts. So it just doesn't make any sense. These companies have had rate increases year in and year out for hundreds of millions of dollars. What have they done with that money, and why do they keep saying they need more? So that okay, the grid's 100 years old. Any company, and this is a company that has no these are companies that don't have competition in delivering your electricity. Any other company or organization or corporation that's in a competitive situation is always reinvesting into their product line so that they continue to sell it to you. Why has ComEd and Ameren waited 100 years to decide that they need to be where everybody else is?
Could there not be an argument made, though, that just as the state has an operating budget and a capital budget, and the state's ongoing cash flow doesn't allow for the building of a bridge over the Mississippi or a university structure, these exceptional expenses, what if the utility companies were to say, we're never going to have the money available from year-to-year operations to afford that exceptional upgrade of the system, plus we're really needing to interact with our other grid partners, if you would, across the United States, so that this is more than just one company. If we're going to get from here to there, we need to have the guaranteed rate of return on the hundreds, or maybe it's even in the billions of dollars, I don't know what the actual dollar, but it would certainly be substantial. What about that kind of an argument that, or just again, none of us go out and buy a house out of our paycheck, we have to take a mortgage out because it's an exceptional expense?
Sure, then state that case to the Illinois Commerce Commission so that everyone can see if that is in fact what's necessary in order to deliver reliable electricity. Don't circumvent it by going to the legislature, who you have in fact made significant campaign contributions for, and saying that you need to change a law to favor you and only you the way you want to get something done. There is a process in place. And with the shortening of the process that they have included in this bill as well, from 12 months to 9 months because they don't want to wait 12 months, there's no reason why it has to last 12 months. If they provide the information that was requested or is requested in order to review these rate increases on a timely basis, maybe it wouldn't take 12 months. It's not, if you shorten it to 9 months, then you've stacked the cards in your advantage in reviewing a case.
Is that much? You know, as I tape this, the Illinois Channel just taped a presentation by Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana, who arguably has made great strides in turning his state economy around. And his phrase was, we move at the speed of business, not at the speed of government. What's wrong with shortening the regulatory process? Is it a critical difference to go from 12 months to 9 months? Wouldn't that still allow for, you know, any opponent to a bill to make their case?
Well, it's 11 months to 8.5 months to be specific. But let me tell you, I do not believe that it's adequate to protect consumers to have a system where you have a monopoly that gets a guaranteed profit, okay? Which basically, the tone of this discussion is, trust us. Trust us. I think we have enough history to know that that's not the way to approach these matters. That there has to be some system in place that protects consumers. I have no doubt that ComEd and Ameren will take care of themselves. What the Attorney General's #1 mission and charge is, both philosophically and under the law, is to protect ratepayers. Who's doing that? I have no problem with ComEd protecting its corporate interests and Ameren and the utilities generally, and they can do that, and they can go to the Illinois Commerce Commission within the existing structure and get what they need. Who's here to speak for the consumers?
Wouldn't we still have the state regulatory infrastructure, and to the extent that the bill would be 10 years, and you had mentioned the cap would only apply for, I think you said 2 years, was it?
Correct.
Wouldn't there still be, what about the argument they might make that they say, look, we're not going anywhere. Our business is to deliver electricity in the state of Illinois. At the end of 10 years, if we've taken advantage of our consumers, we're not going to get an extension if we've proven to be bad stewards. What about the argument that they would have a motivation as good business managers to prove themselves to the state of Illinois and to the regulatory process?
Just one problem. This bill starts out by gutting the regulatory process. So again, to my point, trust us. At the end of 10 years, when the horse is out of the barn, okay, and if bad things have happened, after 10 years, come back and we'll suffer the consequences. What's happened to people on a daily basis in the meantime when this isn't working? When these annual rate increases are happening, 9%, when ComEd is earning double-digit profits along the way. That's just not the way it should be.
One last thing before we go off, and I want to get to, we'll get to another part of this conversation, which is the environmental impact, but when we talk about corporations making double-digit profits, I believe they are also paying a 5% dividend to shareholders. Bob, what about that argument, or to either one of you? You know, you're going to have any number of people, especially in this environment, where retirees are getting nothing on their CDs. What's wrong with the utility paying a 5% dividend, or pensions investing in these companies? And, you know, to the extent that as a corporation they make that money, it also benefits not only the people using electricity on an ongoing basis, but those who are the shareholders and get a 5% dividend.
Well, I think you maybe summed it up. Maybe this is really more about the shareholders than it is about the ratepayers and those the retirees.
Could they not be the same thing, though?
Well, you know, if you're the ratepayers are in a sense taking money out of one pocket and putting it into the other, what have they really gained? If I'm paying, if someone's on an older individual who's not earning a lot on their investments and paying high utility rates, what are they getting in the end?
We should have started off with the fact that where we are legislatively right now is this bill passed the legislature in the spring. It was vetoed by the governor. As we tape this, it is early October. The legislature will be returning to reconsider whether they should override the governor's veto. So it's a very timely conversation. I know you'll be in the thick of that discussion, but we appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with our viewers on this.
And I appreciate that too, and I would just make one plea to the viewers, and we need you to be active. We need your voice to be heard. We can't do this by ourselves. So please call your legislators and please let them know this should not happen and that you are against this.
And I would say in addition to that is that we consider an override of this veto to be what we call a key vote, and we will be informing our 1.7 million AARP members how their elected officials voted on their behalf or not.
Well, Bob Gallo and Paul Gaynor, again, we appreciate you taking the time. We're going to take another viewpoint now on the environmental aspect of it and why some say this is a bad bill for the environment. We just finished talking about some of the regulatory and cost aspects of the SB 1652, the bill that would change the rate increase for electric distribution companies, both Ameren and ComEd. And now we want to talk with Barry Matchette of the Environmental Law and Policy Center about some of the aspects that you feel might be detrimental to the environment. And Barry, thank you first of all for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you for having me.
What, as you look at this bill and what some of the changes would be, what is the reason that your organization is opposed to the bill's passage?
Well, the bill sets up a regulatory construct which we disagree with to begin, and that has been pretty well covered by Paul Gaynor, Bob Gallo in your immediately previous interview. But fundamentally, you know, we have an objection to the regulatory structure that's operated well for over 100 years being essentially radically modified to address what are very specific concerns of two companies. Essentially, the bill has been written by those companies to aid them and their shareholders in a way that we feel is adverse to the ratepayers. And so we start with that as a point of opposition. When it comes to specific elements of the bill on the environment, we have concerns that the bill doesn't go far enough to address our current needs in Illinois. The bill does not specifically enhance a couple of the things that we really value, and that includes the opportunity for the widespread use of renewable energy. We think there are a variety of ways that renewable energy, which is a very successful story over the last 4 or 5 years here in Illinois as a result of some previous legislation, can be enhanced as we look to change the way that we regulate the distribution system. And then second, the proposed method for expanding energy efficiency that is in Senate Bill 1652, we think doesn't go far enough to allow customers, and by extension, allow the utilities to take advantage of the very significant amount of energy efficiency opportunities that exist in Illinois today. And the bill, because of those severe limitations on, one, cleaner energy, and two, avoided energy, and I should note, avoided energy is the cheapest energy. Well, avoided energy is energy efficiency. So if you're in your home and you have an incandescent bulb that burns at 100 watts and emits enough light to light your room, and you change your light bulb to a compact fluorescent light bulb that emits 20 watts of light, but produces the same number of lumens, they call the light in the room lumens, to illuminate that room in the exact same way, you've saved 80% of your energy, and your quality of life hasn't gone down at all. That is a very, very concrete example of energy efficiency.
Do we need that in this bill, though? I mean, because of the previous legislation, I know the utility companies, Ameren has the one program that they advertise heavily, Act on Energy, where they're buying old refrigerators and getting people to buy the CFL or the new bulbs. And,
yes.
In fact, the Illinois Channel did a story with them on that. I ended up changing the bulbs in my own home because of what I could see was quite a savings. Aren't they already doing that, encouraging consumers to switch over to cost savings?
Sure. I think there are two ways to think about energy efficiency as it relates to this particular bill. The first is this: as your previous guests noted, the rate increase that's allowed under this bill is 2.5% a year, every year, all right? That's a significant difference from the way that we regulate the other elements of what I would call policies in our existing statute. The energy efficiency programs that you just referred to must operate under a rate cap that is 2% over the next 30 years. So we're only allowing our utilities to spend 2% of their money effectively. Our rates can only go up 2% total over 30 years. This bill allows the utilities to increase our rates, as Mr. Gaynor noted, 2.5% every year. There's a significant disparity there between what we believe our focus should be on, which is greater energy efficiency for the reason you noted. It saves people money. In fact, our existing statute requires that energy efficiency that the utilities work with consumers on, like a refrigerator rebate program, like a light bulb rebate program, which you undoubtedly, if you bought those new CFLs at the store, they were probably $1 or so, and they may have even come with a rebate. Those were utility programs, and they're running well. The utilities deserve a lot of credit for that. However, those programs cost money, and those costs are limited to, as I said, the 2% over the life of these programs. The bill they want is 2.5% every year. So we feel like that's a wrong emphasis, that there should be, at the minimum, be parity between what goes into distribution system upticks and the energy efficiency program.
So you would, thus far what I'm hearing, you'd want more on the push on those, educating people on how they can save on electricity and using, just as I bought those bulbs that use a fraction. I know one of the stunning statistics that came out when I was talking to the Ameren people over a year ago was they were saying the exit lights we've all seen that burn 24/7 for obvious reasons. If you put in one of the newer applications, that one light would save you $60, dollars per sign in a year. and the new sign would only cost $6.
Correct.
So you got a tenfold. So there can be substantial savings for businesses, certainly businesses, and not many consumers have exits, but still, even in the household, you can have some savings. On the environmental front, I just want to make sure we're not leaving something off the table. Is that the extent of the problem you have, or is there anything else relative to the generation, the coal fire, gas fire? Is there anything on you had mentioned the sustainables. Do you want to ratchet up the goals for the use of wind, solar, and those kind of electric productions?
We have really good standards in place today for sort of the end game for renewable development in Illinois. And I should note that in 2007, when we amended our statute and created a renewable energy standard, there were a lot of organizations that thought, well, Illinois doesn't quite have enough wind to meet that standard. The last 4 years of experience where the Illinois Power Agency has gone out and sought megawatt hours from wind projects has resulted in not only full compliance, but full compliance with our statute at a significantly reduced cost from what was estimated when we talked about passing the bill. So it's a huge success story for particularly central Illinois. Deep southern Illinois hasn't had a whole lot of wind investment because the wind resource in deep southern Illinois is not nearly as good as it is in central Illinois. In northern Illinois, the closer you get to the actual city of Chicago, you end up with some concerns about placing it too close to large metropolitan areas, so that hasn't been an issue. But certainly west of Chicago and north of I-80, northwest Illinois, has seen a significant uptick in wind development, and that's been a very good thing. I think there's another front that's opening on renewable energy development in the state, and that is solar. I believe you covered, actually, when Exelon built a 10 megawatt solar plant right down on the south side of Chicago where the Pullman railroad car site, the assembly site, used to be. This is a big success story. About 33,000 solar panels were put in. It represents, as I said, 10 megawatts of solar energy in northern Illinois. That created lots of jobs, and it's something that we like to give Exelon a lot of credit for. I know that Ameren is looking at options for solar as well in southern Illinois. There's a little more solar radiation in southern Illinois than there is in northern Illinois. So we have a very big success story going on in renewables over the last 4 years. We'd like to see that momentum continue. There are a couple of statutory changes that we have encouraged ComEd and Ameren to incorporate into their bill, and thus far we haven't been able to find a match for those statutory changes, which would deal with the way that renewable energy is purchased. And frankly, they said that our bill, the bill that they're running, dealt only with the movement of power into people's homes and into people's businesses, the distribution system, and didn't deal with generation, and therefore they didn't want it to be involved in their bill. It's our belief that when you start to increase rates on homeowners, you need to be thinking holistically about the entire system. And so we have an objection to the way that that's been handled thus far.
Well, let me just ask before time runs out, what would be wrong with saying, look, the utility companies, Ameren and ComEd, again, we say they're utility companies. I just want to underscore that they're just power distribution companies.
Correct. That's correct.
What's wrong with saying some of the aspects that you're bringing up, where our power comes from, whether it's solar, wind, or whatever, have to do with power generation, not power distribution, and that this bill is about power distribution. What you're talking about really ought to be, they might argue, a separate piece of legislation. We have, as you alluded to, the 2007 legislation that set goals. If we want to improve and advance those, why not negotiate that in a separate piece of legislation?
Absolutely. So that's a valid point, but one that we think doesn't look at this complicated issue in an appropriate way. And the reason we think that is because when you look at the overall bill that a consumer pays, as Mr. Gaynor alluded to, 2/3 of that is the actual electrons. That comes out of our deregulated generation market. 1/3 is the cost that you pay to the distribution company, ComEd or Ameren. So the bill that's in front of us today is the one that deals with that 1/3 for distribution. If you're going to increase distribution rates, as Mr. Gaynor noted, about 9% a year, thus having the impact on the overall bill of 2.5% every single year, you need to figure out how to minimize those costs. One way to minimize those costs.
Let me say, the cost of the utilities would point out, again, that those cost 9% sounds like a big jump, but when you actually put a dollar figure, according to their numbers, the average consumer would only have their rate go up approximately $3 a year.
It's a month. It's
Well,
$3.
they're
It's
saying
$3 a
year.
month.
They're saying $3 a year
No,
over 10 years and $30.
No,
In fact,
it's-
that's where they were saying the numbers that the governor's office were using was not a right number.
No, it's $3 a month, and the reason I know that to be the case is because when you look at the renewable energy standard and our energy efficiency standard, these other two elements that already exist in the Public Utilities Act, that are rate capped at 2% again over the next, all the way out to 2025. We've calculated those numbers multiple times. The Illinois Commerce Commission has, the Illinois Power Agency has. So we have a very, very clear understanding of what that translates into a monthly bill.
And you're saying it would be $3 a month.
Well, in fact, ComEd noted that a number of times this session in Springfield. I think their number was less than $3 a month. I believe it was right around $270, and I know that they've hedged on that a couple of times since then. So,
setting aside the disagreement of what the number is, let's use your number. Would there be offsetting savings, as the utilities would say, that? And by the way, we do have competition coming in. It's been lowering rates, I think, for the commercial segment.
Yes.
There are companies now that are aggressively reaching out to residential people and saying, buy it from me,
Right.
We'll cut your bill by some amount. Can't we have our cake and eat it too? The utilities would say that on one hand, we're having competition. It's going to lower the cost of you buying the power generation to the extent that you pay maybe a bit more, whatever the number is. If it's $3 a month even, that's $36 a year. Wouldn't that be offset? And therefore we get to the 21st century power grid, but at the same time without breaking the bank, because the consumer is going to be saving on the power generation side.
there are two things I think that are important to note. One, we could get to the 21st century power grid with the existing regulatory structure, and I think your two previous guests noted, there's nothing inherently prohibiting the two utilities from investing in whether it's smart grid. And I think it's important to remember that the bill that's put forth is one that splits about 60-40 the amount of money allocated towards smart grid, and the rest would go towards conventional old grid, which is what Mr. Rowe, the chairman of Exelon, said was the wires, right? The cable. That's where a huge portion of this bill goes. And appropriately so.
Of course, those cables do wear out after
absolutely,
a while.
absolutely
They have to be
appropriate.
replaced. It's like tires on a car.
Absolutely.
So I mean, just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with putting money into cables. You have to do that.
And to be even more clear, Terry, there's nothing wrong with putting money into a smart grid. But the bill is not so much about either of those. That's simply an allocation of funds. It's how you get the funds in the door, and then how the public's interest is essentially protected when those funds come in. Right? It's the restructuring of the way that the ICC would regulate and check these two monopolies that are ComEd and Ameren. That's what this bill is
It
about.
wouldn't, well, I mean, Mr. Gaynor said it would gut the regulatory process. I think the utilities would say moving from 11.5 months to 8.5 months is not gutting the process.
The one part that's, I think, important to note about the process, whether it's 11 months or 8.5 months, is that under the structure that has been proposed, there would first be a proceeding at the commission where parties would be able to argue about what the right equation would be. Is 1 plus 1 going to equal 2, or maybe better put, is x plus y going to equal z, or is x plus y going to equal z squared? Or is it going to equal A?
You lost me on that one.
No, but the point, so you're first you establish an equation,
Okay.
right? Expenses, income, what's the rate that you and I have to pay? Once that equation is established, you heard Mr. Gaynor talk about a FERC Form 1, after that it's on autopilot. The intent of the bill is to establish a process at the ICC that results in a formula rate. It takes out the human discretion of looking at the numbers. that the utility has incurred, whether it's on the expense side for a very reasonable investment, like new wires in the ground or on poles, or charitable contributions. The entire rate structure of the utility under the bill that they've proposed would all go into the formula, which would automatically trigger the outcome that the equation decides it should trigger. This is very much a black box. Let's create the black box, and then out of it comes, because it's a formula rate, the adjustment is very, very small, and it removes the human discretion on things that in the past public interest groups have thought were very important to get taken out of rates. Again, like charitable contributions,
Let me
like
ask, because
attorney's
time
fees.
is growing short, I just want to ask one last question. What's the solution? Is the solution in your mind to leave things as they are, or is there some other approach that would be able to bring the two sides together?
I think it's a very good question. I think the solution in my mind is to do a number of things. Number one, we do need to modernize our grid, and we should figure out a way to do that modernization that spreads the risk evenly between ratepayers and shareholders of the two large utilities. What's before us as a bill is one that has the shareholders bearing all of the responsibility. It's not 60-40, it's not 70-30, it's 100-0. That's the problem. So if you have something that bears that risk proportionally, that's a very, very good start. Second, I think we need to be thinking of ways to tweak our regulatory structure to get to a place where we are incenting the utilities to do things that result in a 21st century grid and a 21st century generation system. So that would involve more renewable energy, something that we can grow here in Illinois. It can't be shipped out. It's something that we can do across the state, whether you're in deep southern Illinois and you're doing solar, or fuel cells, or biofuels, whether you're in central Illinois and you're doing a ton of wind, whether you're in northern Illinois and you're doing wind, or a combination of advanced fuels. Those are all the kind of things that we need to be thinking about in a comprehensive way, because that positions us well for the next 20 years. What we have in front of us is sort of a one-off. Let's see if we can get a bill through Springfield that's going to greatly enhance our ability to build out a very specific item and reduce our regulatory risk to zero. And that's a problem.
Barry Matchette, we appreciate you taking the time. These
Absolutely.
are very complicated issues. Even with the 40-something minutes on the topic, we can only scratch the surface on some of these. There's a lot of things more I would have loved to talk about. On the area of some of these power issues, maybe we can do another interview at some point.
Thank you.
Looking forward, but to the viewers again, the legislature comes back in for the fall veto session. This is Senate Bill 1652. And if you want to get a hold of your lawmakers and express your view one way or the other, feel free. Very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.